Saw yet another report in the news, ITV's website, talking about how there's been a huge increase continues to be an increase in number of attacks by dogs on livestock, and how it's being attributed to people taking staycations or people with lockdown taking their dogs into rural locations to exercise them. If that is the reason, which I believe it is a very large part of the reason, is that people are going into rural locations with inadequate control and inadequate understanding, and in several instances acting irresponsibly, although in the vast majority of cases just simply being taken by surprise and being unprepared, not knowing what the dog is actually capable of or how weak the control over that dog is until you're faced with a situation where you require that control. If that is the case, then why are the Kennel Club, why are the NFU telling parliamentary groups like the All-Party Group for Animal Welfare in 2017 that the reason for dog attacks, the primary reason for dog attacks, isn't dogs taking off in the countryside and attacking livestock, but is because dogs have escaped from homes and gardens? And this was equally sort of like repeated in a recent presentation by the North Wales Police Rural Crime Team, who also say, statistics show that up to 89% of attacks occur when there is no owner present, and in other areas that's 79%, etc., when you're over into England. And so they've escaped from homes and gardens. But that, again, I know I've said this before, but that isn't actually what the evidence suggests or what the evidence says. That's a hypothesis that people have come up with, because the evidence says that there was no owner present, and so people think, well, they must have escaped from the homes and gardens then. But if that's the case, then why is there an increase when people are actually walking their dogs in the countryside? They're not moving house to the middle of the countryside, they're walking their dogs, and they're seeing an increase in attacks. And it's simply because, as I've said before, the dog wants to. The dog sees the opportunity, it is an opportunistic predator, it takes it and it will attack. And quite often this takes many owners by surprise. They're horrified that their dog could do this, they never expected that their dog could do this. And even if they thought that their dog has the potential to do this, when they're in situations like this, where they consider it to be completely safe, there's actually sheep over there. You wouldn't know it because you can't see them. And nor could the owner who walks their dog along, who thinks, well, they're in my line of sight and I've got pretty decent control until it sees a sheep. But I don't know that I've got no control when it sees a sheep, because I've never tested it safely to be able to proof and train to make sure that I do have control over the dog, whether it's a sheep or whatever it happens to be, high distraction, another animal, another living being that dog actually takes off after. I don't know, because I've never been in a position to test that, because I'm being told by organisations to keep my dog on a lead, as though no matter how obedient it is, keep it on a lead, as though obedience is secondary, control is secondary, training and preparation is secondary to this length of material, this length of leather or nylon that connects the two of us, as though that is the answer. And I have to question how often these people have actually seen a determined dog in the presence of prey animals, how it acts on that lead, and how utterly dangerous and threatening that dog is or can be, how it can break leads, how it can escape from harnesses or collars or whatever, but the threat that it poses, as opposed to a dog that is well trained, as opposed to a dog that is obedient, as opposed to a dog that is controlled, where somebody out of courtesy in the direct vicinity of livestock puts a lead on it to send a signal out to say, look at me, I'm being responsible, but isn't reliant upon it. But when you get stakeholders putting out this message that your reliance should be on restraining an untrained predator in the presence of prey, you have a huge issue. You have a huge issue, because that doesn't work. It hasn't worked for the last 40 years, and it won't work for the next 40 years. And again, like I've said before, no matter how much you increase penalties, yes, increase the penalties, absolutely fine. It won't stop it. It won't make a blind bit of difference, because the dog doesn't understand the consequence of the legal system. It has no financial loss to worry about, or no sort of like loss of freedom through a custodial sentence. So it makes no difference. You're trying to say to people, look, use a lead, and if your dog does something, we're going to punish you heavily. But you're not actually proactively trying to stop anything. You're not actually trying to train the animal that's the one responsible for it. The only thing that will actually stop it from happening, the very best thing that you can possibly do, is have the animal think, I don't want to approach that animal because that animal is more dangerous to me than I am to it. So I'll forget about it. And the best way of achieving that is through aversive conditioning. And aversive conditioning, the most appropriate way of achieving that and the most efficient and effective way of achieving that is through an electronic training collar. a quality electronic training collar used under supervision. You know, but you can't accept that, you can't allow that, because you've already laid your cards on the table in respect of that and said that they're cruel and barbaric and punitive devices. And now you're reveling in the results of your decision-making processes. You're seeing the future. You've got the opportunity to look at it and put the brakes on and think, perhaps this isn't such a good idea. Perhaps there ought to be a regulatory model. Perhaps we ought to have exceptions where we can say, under these circumstances, this would prove very, very responsible. But you're acting incredibly irresponsibly by refusing to do that.